Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Samanthropolitics. I know I've been away for a couple weeks for the holidays. Thanks for your patience. I'm sure there was plenty of other news to watch. We've had a unbelievable week this week with the Georgia Senate runoffs, and then what transpired on Wednesday, which was unprecedented and unbelievably shocking. So first, let's start with the Georgia Senate races, which is good news for the Democrats in that Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff both won by very slim margins to be in the United States Senate. This was, I think Ossoff's race was the most expensive race in the history of the Senate. And he also is quite young. He's 33 years old, was a documentary filmmaker who worked on issues of social injustice in his films and is now going to be bringing that passion for humanity and for social injustice to the Senate. And then Raphael Warnock was a pastor, an African-American pastor who also has a passion for those same issues of social justice. So we're also going to see him, and I think he's going to be a real firehouse in the Senate. So right after that transpired, what happened? Well, Washington, D.C., where I live and many others who are watching this live, went into lockdown because MAGA protesters, Make America Great Again, Trump supporters, were swarming the Capitol in thousands and thousands of numbers, trying to get into the Capitol, many armed with guns, knives, random Viking equipment like horns. So let's just take a look and see what happened. Meg, can you just cue that video?
How is it possible that these protesters got so far, that they were able to breach the Capitol in such an easy way, and such a contrast to what we saw this summer during the Black Lives Matter protests, when you had a phalanx of armed law enforcement officials in combat gear prepared to protect the Capitol?
Mike, are we live on that footage? Yep. Okay, great.
There we go.
We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
Now that number's up to 5 people that I believe with the death of a Capitol Hill police officer.
Why are you known as badasses around the Capitol? But then Trump supporters come in and you open the fucking doors for them. You open the doors for them and let them breach the people's house. What is wrong with you?
Well, thank you so much, Megan. So I wanted to play that video because I thought that what was really striking there was the disparity between the response of the overwhelming response to Black Lives Matter protesters, and frankly, to every protest that I've been at in Washington, D.C. I was there, protesting Brett Kavanaugh, and people were being taken away who were sitting there peacefully with, shirts that talked about sexual violence. You could see the disability protesters protesting the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, literally being dragged out in a wheelchair, which is like almost like disgusting, frankly. And then you have this huge mob, and you just don't see near the response that you should have seen. And one of the things that happened was that the National Guard was deployed immediately for Black Lives Matter. And it's so obviously political because Trump labeled them Antifa, said that the Black Lives Matter protesters, they were against him, frankly, because he's a racist president. And so the response was, okay, we're bringing in out helicopters, we're scaring people. Lots of friends that were in front of the White House in Lafayette Square who were peaceably protesting, and all of a sudden they were tear gassed and there were flashbangs, and it was crazy. And yet all of a sudden there's thousands of people in this mob that was highly anticipated. It was all over social media. It was everywhere. Trump even tweeted about it. Come to the Capitol on January 6th to interrupt the certification of the electoral vote. And yet the preparation for a crowd of that magnitude, especially knowing that a crowd like that would probably be armed, since there are many of the Second Amendment people, was woefully terrifying in terms of the lack of response. And a lot of the reporting now is showing that Trump held up the dispersion of the National Guard, that the Maryland National Guard was trying to get through and say, we have people ready to go, just give us the word, just authorize us. And the Secretary of Defense wasn't taking calls. That's according to reporting by MSNBC and Rachel Maddow. Pretty striking. You have an attack happening on the Capitol, and the Secretary of Defense is not taking calls, and they will not authorize the disbursement of troops. Unbelievably striking. So we have 5 people dead, including a Capitol Hill police officer, 1 domestic terrorist trying to climb through a broken window, and 3 others who had medical emergencies on the ground. It's unclear what exactly happened there. And it's really important to note, too, this wasn't a peaceful protest, and it was there were some pretty hairy individuals there. So the guy that you've seen, Meg, can you put up that picture of the Viking dude? The guy that you see who looks borderline ridiculous. I don't really understand how anyone could listen to somebody who looks like a Viking and is wearing loincloths, is Jake Angeli, who has been a huge QAnon reporter. He's an actor from Arizona. I'm going to be guessing by his appearance at the protest that he is not getting any acting work. And so he's living out his own fantasy life as an actor by being a Viking, banging on the doors and living out his own little fantasy tale. Ridiculous. There were also people wearing shirts that said 6 million wasn't enough, which was a reference to the Jews in the Holocaust, which is absolutely atrocious. As a Jewish person, that's so scary. And somebody wearing a shirt that said Camp Auschwitz. And as many people know, millions and millions of Jews were gassed to death and murdered at Auschwitz. So let's bring in, we're going to talk a little bit about what the breaking news is in terms of what is going on in terms of the response. But before I get into that breaking news, I want to bring in our special guest. So Michael Harris is a congressional staffer. He manages Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's Florida Congressional District 23, her work on the Appropriations Committee, where he works to advance the congresswoman's funding priorities and direct federal agencies on how to spend taxpayer dollars. He covers all federal appropriations, but he specializes in energy, environment, and in conservation issues. He has a big background in the environment. He also has served as a legislative aide in the office of Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid, and he has a bachelor's degree in public policy from Duke and has his master's in public policy from George Washington University. But the reason we're bringing Michael in today is because he was there at the scene of it all and was still, I think, a little bit shocked. So really, really happy to have you on the show, Michael.
Thanks so much, Samantha. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I wish it were under better circumstances.
Well, when Congress starts passing bills, because the House and the Senate are now owned by Democrats, we'll have you on the show again to talk about all the accomplishments that you're making. How about that?
I look forward to that.
So, Michael, so you were there when all of this happened. So can you just walk us through where you were and how everything transpired?
Yeah, sure. So in the days leading up to it, we kept getting very concerning emails from the Sergeant at Arms warning us that something is going to go down. And of course, the whole world knew this. President Trump was broadcasting, on Twitter, and all of his cronies were urging people to storm DC. So this was not a surprise. But we nevertheless wanted to do our job and certify the election. And, this was supposed to be a procedural, quasi-ceremonial event just to certify the electors and declare President Biden the formal winner. In most years, you never hear about this. But unfortunately, it has become a flashpoint, as we saw on Wednesday. I actually had my deputy chief of staff drive me into work because I didn't want to walk. I was too concerned being, a Democratic staffer, a queer person, and someone of Mexican descent. I didn't want to be around all of these radical people.
So you were already scared going into this. I mean, you were already like a little bit anxious, like this is not going to be good.
Oh yeah. I felt a high degree of anxiety, but I felt just this determination that we needed to do our job, show stability, show that the legislative branch of the U.S. government is not going to be deterred. We're not going to be, frightened away. We're going to carry on with the sacrosanct business of democracy. So, that's what we tried to do. And the day started with, some scattered protests around the Capitol. And I was there really just to make sure that my boss was getting to the floor on time and reacting in real time to any Republican shenanigans that were going to be called, because we expected, these objections to these certifications. And we expected it to be a long day, but we really had no idea. But, we think that our law enforcement structures and agencies probably should have expected this and probably should have been a little more prepared. I remember the first sign of trouble was when I could hear cops converging outside my window, and I have my office in the Longworth House office building, and I remember hearing cop cars outside the window, just a lot of them swarming, and I thought, oh, this isn't good. And then soon after that, I thought, well, before anything gets too hairy, I'm going to get some food because I was starving. I got in the elevator. I went down to the basement into the underground tunnel complex beneath the Capitol, which is like its own little city down there. I stepped out of the elevator and immediately I encountered just roaming bands of maskless MAGA protesters with the red caps, and immediately alarm bells started ringing because first of all, it's COVID, and that shouldn't be happening. The buildings are pretty secure normally, and normally they don't like that kind of stuff. They're ordinarily because of COVID only letting in staff and members and officials, but. So that was weird. And they were just roaming the halls. And I thought, oh, this is a dangerous situation for many reasons. So I hopped back in the elevator.
Did anyone see you? Like, did you yeah.
Oh, yeah. People saw me. And that's why I ran back in, because all of a sudden they turned to look at me. I looked quite out of place wearing a full suit and a mask. And my staff badge. So I was like, oh, I should get away from here as quickly as possible. So luckily I was able to run back into the elevator, and that's when I ran back into the office and told my boss something is not right. So I told her I'm locking our door, which we never do. And I don't think, I've worked in different congressional offices, and I don't think any congressional office really is in the habit of locking their door during the day. We want to always be welcoming, always, want to be open to constituents. But so that in itself was weird to me. But I told her, I'm locking the door. There's just random people wandering around without masks and looking suspicious. And of course, she was fine with that. And then pretty soon.
How did you feel, Michael? I mean, what was going through your head?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I felt like my heart rate start to go up, and felt kind of starting to feel a little concerned, not only for myself, of course, but for my deputy chief who was in the office with me, and the member, my boss, the congresswoman. I was thinking, I really, really hope no one comes and tries to knock on our door. And at some points throughout the day, we heard screaming and crowds outside our door, and that was very frightening, because my boss is kind of a high profile member, and we were a little worried about what might happen, if they managed to see her name outside of our office. But thoughts started going through my head, like, am I going to have to barricade the door? Am I going to have to defend the congresswoman somehow? Am I going to have to get out our hoods, which are used for gas in case there's a gas attack?
Yeah.
So all those thoughts were going through my head at that point.
So it could have been should have had some school shooting drills in the Capitol. I think that's also the scary part too, is knowing that these people could have been armed, right, and have guns. Exactly.
Yeah, and I was occasionally looking out my window before things started to get really bad, and Capitol Police sent around messages saying, shelter, protect yourself, stay far away from windows. That was much later in the day, but I was looking out the windows, and I could see people with all sorts of weaponry, everything from assault rifles to those plastic handcuff ties. And that almost made me more concerned than the assault rifles.
What do you mean by the plastic handcuff ties? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, actually, I've actually seen Capitol Police use these to drag off peaceful protesters before, as you mentioned. But basically, they're just like disposable, like temporary handcuffs that are just easy to zip on a person very quickly. And so I started thinking, that's bizarre.
People or something like Gretchen Whitmer, the whole Gretchen Whitmer plot.
Exactly. So I was thinking, are they looking to take hostages or what? And I heard from some colleagues that were in the Capitol at the time just just across the street that some of them were shouting for the speaker and saying, "Where is she? Where is she?" And that is terrifying.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. How did the congresswoman take it?
Honestly, she held up pretty well. I don't want to speak for her, of course, but my own observation is that she held strong and kept her composure and really I think showed a resolute determination to persist and wait this out and get back to business. Though that's not to say she was entirely normal. It wasn't like any other day. And what I mean by that is, I just remember her being livid, just the whole day, just absolutely furious. And that's kind of how I have been feeling the past 2 days as I try and process all this. Just a lot of fury, rage, and trying to figure out all that went wrong. While it was happening, I think I was in a state of shock because it felt like a dream. It felt surreal. Like I was watching the House floor just to monitor votes and such, and all of a sudden I hear the sergeant at arms evacuate the speaker and evacuate members. Excuse me. And at one point I heard, which just really made it hit home for me. I heard someone say, "Members, get under your desks, get under your desks."
Wow.
And that at the time I was like, oh my God, this feels like some sort of horrible spy novel. This doesn't feel like real life,
Right, absolutely. I mean, that must have been so incredibly terrifying. And it sounds like you and the congresswoman both handled it with grace. And frankly, I mean, it strikes me when you say that she was waiting it out. Like, I mean, the fact that Congress went back into the session after all this to finish things up is pretty amazing. I mean, that's patriotism. Like, that's amazing. Like, I would have been like, I'm going home. I got to get out of this place. I'm done for the day. Leave me alone. And like the fact that everyone wanted to continue and be like, no, this is our duty. I mean, that is patriotism, not the hooliganism that we saw outside.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was a really long day for a lot of us, but we were absolutely determined to get back to business and finish this thing. There was some wondering, are we going to have to recess until tomorrow? And everyone in our caucus, and even many Republicans, just wanted to get it done, wanted to send this message that we would not be deterred by this angry mob. And that's I haven't even mentioned another aspect of this, which is the explosive devices that were found by Capitol Police at both the RNC and DNC, and that was another level of craziness, that people had actually put together these improvised explosive devices and planted them at these political headquarters. And from my office, I could look out the window and see the very weirdly shaped truck, Capitol Police truck, that's like a containment vehicle for detonating these devices. And pretty soon I got a message after I saw that saying, from Capitol Police saying, expect a loud bang. And sure enough, I heard a loud bang out my window. And that's never a comforting sound that one wants to hear, especially while at work,
Oh my goodness. Unbelievable. The other thing you mentioned that I think is really important as we kind of capture the emotions and environment going into a new administration is your anger and your fury. Who are you angry at?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's what I've been trying to ponder on the past couple days. I'm angry at at Donald Trump, of course. He's the obvious pick for inciting this insurrection, this domestic terrorist attack. But I'm angry at a lot of other actors as well. I'm angry at so many Republican politicians whose offices I often work with every day on legislation that the public often never hears about, the media doesn't report about, but is still important stuff. And I work with these offices, I work with these people. My boss works with these people. And I've been angry at a lot of them. After all that went down, we still had 120 something Republicans on one state objection vote to support that objection, and 130 or so on another state objection. Pennsylvania and Arizona were the two that were objected to, and even those that didn't vote to object to these counts, a lot of them still went on the floor and spoke in favor of overturning the election. And, called it.
What were their grounds? I mean, what were the grounds of overthrowing the election?
I don't really think they have grounds, to be honest. I think their arguments were specious at best and utter lies at worst. They had a lot of conspiracy theories, saying that. I remember hearing one member say that Democratic state legislators had all worked together, had all done this conspiracy to, I don't know what, rig the election, I guess, or, because they're mad about mail-in voting, I guess, opening up the access to the ballot.
God forbid that people vote by mail in a global pandemic where everyone's scared of getting COVID. So
exactly. And even outside of COVID, I don't see a problem with making sure as many American citizens that want to vote can vote. So they had all these crazy conspiracy theories. As President-elect Biden would say, it was malarkey. What I was hearing on the floor.
I love that word.
I know. Well, I'm really looking forward to having him very soon, because I think it's a breath of very fresh air that we will be desperately needing in this country. So I'm just, I'm trying to channel my anger right now into productive things, trying to, work on legislation, figure out, our priorities for the coming Congress, but at the same time, I think we can't just let this go. There have to be consequences. And I'm not talking about, angry, violent mobs or vigilante justice or any of that, God, no. But I'm talking about due process of law. There has to be accountability. There has to be justice. And I really hope that all of this isn't just swept under the rug in favor of, moving on and letting bygones be bygones. I strongly believe that if we don't take some action, if these people aren't held accountable, then we encourage further, rebellion and further extremism. And that's something that this country, I don't think it can endure. I mean, we're in a very fragile place, and we're a resilient democracy. But I think Wednesday showed that democracy isn't invulnerable. We shouldn't take it for granted.
Yeah, we have a comment from one of our viewers, Geck, who pointed out how Ted Cruz said on the floor that because I think it was that like 38% of Americans believe that the votes were a lie, that they should consider the objections regardless of it. I mean, that's kind of like saying, okay, well, 38% of Americans believe that climate change isn't real. So we should consider, objecting to any policies on climate change, right? Like it's, And the thing about Ted Cruz, and I was going to ask you this question, and Ted, thank you, or Geck, thank you for reminding me, is that Ted Cruz is, a Harvard-educated lawyer. He's not a stupid guy. Like, he knows that this was not this was not an election that was fraudulent. He 1000% knows it. So, I was wondering, you've worked with these Republican congressmen and women. Like, how many of them, like, why are they doing this? How in God's name could they get up after there's an armed insurrection cited by our president, who I would argue is the biggest domestic terrorist of all, and kind of violent entrepreneur? How could they then get up and vote against? And essentially, by voting against it, they're saying we still want Trump to be president after he just incited an armed insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and then did not deploy the National Guard to protect people. I mean, what is your opinion on the psychology of those congresspersons and what they're thinking as they make those votes?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm no psychologist, but I hear what they say, behind the scenes. I talk to their staff, and, it's I'll just say it's very different from what I hear in public, from most of these Republican members. I think it's a survival instinct in their mind, in terms of their political careers. Donald Trump remains still extremely popular within the Republican Party. And look, he got nearly 75 million votes in the last presidential election. That's, you have to pay attention to that if you're a Republican politician. You don't have to go along with him, though. If you had courage, if you valued your principles, if you valued your country, if you valued your fellow country men and women, and everyone in between, and all other gender identities, if you value them, then you should stand up and do the right thing. And unfortunately, I've been battling kind of two thoughts in my head the past 2 days. One of them is, I'm pleased to see some of these Republican politicians, finally standing up and saying the right things. But, the other thought is, this guy is going to be gone in less than 2 weeks. He just staged an armed insurrection, a domestic terrorist attack on our temple of democracy. You don't really get many kudos from me and from a lot of our caucus members and staff on the Democratic side for speaking up now. It seems to a lot of us like image rehabilitation, and it seems hollow. And that's what I've been struggling with. If we're going to have a healthy, functioning democracy, we need a country, and we need a Republican Party that fully reckons with what happened. And I'm not just talking about with what happened on Wednesday, but what happened during the past 4 years, and what happened in the decades leading up to this, because Donald Trump didn't come out of nowhere. So I think, a serious reckoning needs to happen, some serious soul searching, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of our viewers again points out that the mob killed a police officer. And I think it's important too to point out that there's been discussion of Capitol Police and taking selfies with protesters, but also to point out, like, the Capitol Police are not a monolith, and they just weren't prepared. I mean, the National Guard, everybody knew that there were going to be tons and tons of protesters that were coming to the Capitol. They're literally, I parked yesterday in DC, and there was a sign that said no parking from January 5th to 6th at this time because of First Amendment activity. And that it wasn't even near the Capitol. I was like downtown DC. And like, everybody knew this was going to happen, and there weren't enough troops on standby, and it was clearly partisan motivated that there wasn't. And to think about the fact that like, when you say like we can't just like let bygones be bygones, like the president of the United States instigated an armed insurrection against our capital. Like that is just, of all of the stupid crap that Trump has done. I mean, this is just another level. And it's like, and then his discussions now, can I pardon myself? Like this man that basically has so much power and just literally thinks he can do whatever he wants and has so much blood on his hands. It's just, we can't just be like, okay, that was fun. Like, let's move on. No, like,
right.
Like we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We need to I think we need to do something about who's able to approve the National Guard to be brought in. We need to have and the response time was so slow, which looked like it was clearly because of Trump not letting the National Guard deploy from DC and Maryland. Ousley asked, is this stream left or right leaning? I would say, Ousley, that this stream is humanity leaning towards preserving the rights of all human beings, regardless of their sex, gender orientation, race, religion, age, ethnicity, or where they're from. It's not about left or right. It's about protecting people's human rights and protecting their lives. So that's what's been so striking about the whole presidency. It's not about right or left. I mean, it's about basic humanity. That's really what it comes down to. It's not about whether you think that there should be big government or small government. It's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and that's why it's been so frustrating to see the past few years the Republicans in the House and especially the Senate, where Mitch McConnell has been reigning, failing to take any action to hold the president accountable, and even to this day are still wringing their hands about what to do. It's like you created this monster, you didn't hold him accountable at any stage, and we impeached him for I don't have to get into that, but we impeached him, and that was an opportunity to really take a stand for this country and our institutions. And it's been sad to see, for our country, but also, as someone who works in Congress, it's been sad to see what has been done to our legislative branch. We're supposed to be a co-equal branch of government. We're the Article 1 branch of government in the Constitution. And a lot of these Republicans in the Senate have just laid down at the feet of the executive because Donald Trump is in charge. So he learned that there are no consequences to his actions. And I think in so doing, he's unfortunately exposed a lot of structural vulnerabilities, a lot of structural weaknesses in our institutions that I think will take us years to fully process and fix. But we're going to try in this next Congress and with President Biden in office. So that's going to be our work, and it's going to be a lot of work.
Absolutely. I was laughing when you were talking about you created this beast. Have you ever seen Little Shop of Horrors?
Yeah.
Okay, so Little Shop of Horrors, for those who don't know, is like, it's a movie with what is his name? Rick Morannis. And it's also a musical, but it's basically about a human eating plant that survives off of blood. And so Rick Morannis doesn't want the plant to die, so he keeps like feeding it blood. And then the plant, there's this song that goes, "Feed me. Does it have to be human? Feed me. Does it have to be mine? Feed me, Seymour. Feed me all night long." And so he continues feeding the plant his blood, and then basically at the end of the play, the plant eats him.
There you go.
I just was thinking about that analogy to Trump of like, all of these Republican senators have kind of been feeding him their their blood, their loyalty, their whatever. And then essentially, I mean, if you looked at this race in Georgia, some of the kind of hyperbole is that it was actually affiliation with Trump that sunk some of them, because Trump called into question whether voting was legitimate because Biden won Georgia. And so then some Republicans didn't come out because they're like, oh, well, my vote doesn't matter. So, I think, you also mentioned the people that are like people resigning now and speaking up, like Betsy DeVos resigned, like, oh my God, she was so horrible. Like Elaine Chao, who shouldn't have been transportation secretary in the first place and was clearly put there because Mitch McConnell's her husband. And I saw this hilarious meme today that was like, I applaud all of those who are resigning. Sometimes I wait a second longer to take my seatbelt off before the plane hits the ground or something. Like basically saying like, this is what you're doing is like, this is not like, woo, like commended, like you're the most amazing person ever. It's like, if you don't do this, there's something literally wrong with you.
Right. I don't think they deserve plaudits for doing the absolute barest minimum at this point with, less than 2 weeks left in this administration. It's kind of laughable that a lot of these people even have the audacity to release these public statements saying they believe in the rule of law and the integrity of the Constitution. And it's like I've been in hearings where a lot of these secretaries and administration officials have just openly lied to us about things and defended the president at every turn, defended his policies, could never bring themselves to say a bad thing about him. And so forgive me, maybe I'm just a DC cynic at this point, but it's appearing hollow to me.
Yeah, so. No, I mean it's hugely hollow. I just want to cover what the breaking news was that just came out about an hour ago. Was that this? I think, despite all of the things that Trump has done, the recognition that this was just so far beyond the pale. So Twitter, Trump's favorite mode of communication with his base, has permanently suspended President Trump's account. They cited the risk of further incitement of violence. So the president's account was initially banned for 12 hours due to what they called severe violations of their civic integrity policy when he tweeted condemnation against Vice President Mike Pence. And they also removed a couple of tweets of his that were seen as inciting violence. So hundreds of Twitter employees signed a letter urging Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey to ban the president for using the platform to incite violence in the wake of the Capitol siege. I think that pressure definitely mattered. And then Facebook has also said that they are indefinitely banning the president, but for at least the 2 weeks that he's left. So that was like a little bit unclear. Are they banning him indefinitely, or are they like just using vague language because their comms person was like, well, don't ban him indefinitely. I don't know. You can't say that. And obviously they own Instagram as well. So what's your opinion on that? On finally Trump banning Twitter from its platform, or Twitter banning Trump from its platform?
Yeah. It's kind of similar to what I just said about the statements from a lot of these Republican politicians. It's kind of too little too late, in my view. Like it took you inciting a rebellion that almost burned down the Capitol to finally get banned. Like he has done all sorts of things to incite violence and hatred and bigotry, and he's done that for years. And people have been pushing on Twitter, pushing on Facebook, and they just have resisted. Because they're businesses and they want to have influence. They want to have customers, users, companies with ads to sell. So, in my view, it's a little too late at this point. I'm obviously glad it happened. I think it's overdue. But he has created such a toxic environment on Twitter for so long, and he's whipped his followers into frenzies for for so long. So I don't know. It just seems like really at this point, this is what it took. I don't know. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, and I think these platforms, frankly, have also waited until he was clearly not going to be the president anymore, and couldn't. He's so erratic. He could have declared an executive order to get rid of Facebook and Twitter. I mean, he could have done a million things. Like, you look at countries like Russia or Belarus or places where the media is, or China, where the media is controlled by the state. Where, I mean, in China, you can't even access Facebook. Like, that's a governmental decision that there cannot be Facebook in China. So I'm sure that during the reign of his presidency, that they were thinking, like, like, we could, if we're not careful, like, we could actually potentially, he could just ban us.
Right.
And so, and that raises the other issue that I think is interesting that we have to reckon with, which is the role of corporate in healing our democracy. And like the the Wall Street Journal published an op-ed basically saying, hey, corporate people who issue public statements saying Black Lives Matter and we care so much about Black people and we really care about you, but then donated billions of dollars to Trump or voted for Trump. I mean, I literally met a guy the other day who said, all I care about is keeping more money in my pocket. Like, no view of human rights, no view of literally anything other than his wallet becoming fatter. That was his narcissistic view. And so we also have to ask ourselves, like, how are we breeding people that are so narcissistic? They don't care about the human rights of other people. Like, all they care about is money and financial returns.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Republican politicians kind of had that mindset the past few years. Like, we'll make a deal with the devil for tax cuts and corporate profits and regulation slashing, and we'll turn a blind eye and look the other way. With all the other horrible policies and institutional destruction that Trump wrought, and I think it's incredibly harmful. It's myopic. And it also shows a lot of privilege, that they think they can be untouched by Trump's crazy policies and spewing of hatred on Twitter. But real people can get hurt, and they have gotten hurt. Like, speaking of Twitter, this isn't the first time Trump has whipped his people into a frenzy. My boss's name was scrawled as the return address on 16 pipe bombs about 2 years ago, and sent to prominent elected officials like Eric Holder, Barack Obama. I think the guy sent one to CNN. And one of them came back to our office because it had her return, her name and return address, her name misspelled, on it, and it had to be detonated in our stairwell in our district office. Luckily, our district staff was, very concerned when they saw the package, and they were smart enough. Hey, we probably shouldn't open this. But Trump has caused all sorts of violent plots that we've often just not paid attention to or forgotten about or swept under the rug. So this has been an ongoing thing, and it's I'm like I said, I'm glad that finally some people are waking up, but this has been ongoing.
Yeah. So have you been back to the Capitol since Wednesday, or are they still cleaning up? And
I've not been back. I've tried to stay away, frankly, and recuperate. I live about 10-minute walk away from the Capitol, so I'm not too far. But I've just been trying to really digest, what happened and process my reaction to it. And I've been working from home. I really haven't had much chance to just take a break and process, because we're starting a new Congress. We're beginning with, a new administration. So, I've been on Zoom calls and meetings and everything all day. So hopefully this weekend I can just take some time to, sit back and reflect and, process what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other breaking news is that Nancy Pelosi has announced the intention for the House to impeach President Trump on one count, which is the incitement to insurrection, I think it's called. Incitement to insurrection. Mm-hmm. Incitement of insurrection. Did your office have any part in that? And what's the opinion of the Congresswoman? I know you can't speak for her, but on impeaching the president in his last days.
Yeah, like you said, I don't want to speak for her, but I can say that she was one of the members that publicly supported this. We put out a statement that said something like, this guy shouldn't be in office a day longer. Basically anything, whether it's 25th Amendment or impeachment to get this guy out, because the caucus call today, which I heard about from my boss, was just it was full of rage. A lot of our members are just livid and trying to process what happened to them as well. My boss, we were holed up in our office and getting texts from other members saying I'm in this random room in the Capitol, barricading the door. I remember Grace Meng, representative of New York, said something like, I had to text my family that I love them because I was so scared. And
that makes me want to cry. That's so awful.
Yeah, that's how a lot of members felt. As these people were banging on the doors and trying to find them. So understandably, there's a lot of rage from our caucus and a lot of hunger for accountability. So that's what the caucus call today was all about. I've heard from my boss that it was all about how do we best hold this guy accountable. It's hard with less than 2 weeks left. It's hard to get all our ducks in a row and process impeachment, but it looks like the speaker wants to try. I say good for her. That's just my personal opinion, but I say good for her because, like I said, we need to show that we fully intend to hold this guy accountable. And we'll see what the Senate does. I don't have a lot of faith in a lot of these Senate Republicans, unfortunately, but I do think a lot of them are starting to feel like.
I mean, were they shaken? I mean, were they? I mean, is it not as scary as a Republican because you knew they weren't coming? They weren't coming for you, but I mean, they must have also been shaken and having these armed protesters wandering around.
Oh yeah, sure. I think they're having a complex reaction. A lot of them. There's kind of one camp that's just die hard, totally with Trump, voting to overturn the election, and another camp that's trying to figure out how to do the right thing while also staying in the good graces of the Republican electorate. And that's an interesting tightrope to watch them walk. But a lot of them are concerned. I remember seeing video footage just a little while ago of Senator Lindsey Graham in the airport, just 10 minutes away from me, being hounded by Trump supporters, whom Lindsey Graham has always counted on. So I think now they're having this confusing reaction, what do we do? We need these people, but also these people are interested in insurrection. So, and it's really, unfortunately, still sowing a lot of conflict and division. During the the attack on Wednesday, while all of these members were holed up in various rooms throughout the Capitol complex, there was a lot of argument that I've heard about between members, just about who's to blame and who's responsible and all of that. So it's messy right now. is the best I can say.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, it's so much easier. I think what's been so hard, and I've done a lot of shows about how the United States has finally recognized that domestic terrorism is our biggest national security threat. That was in the last Homeland Security briefing or report. I think it's just been generally, it's so much easier when a nation can go, oh, they did that to us. Oh, the Islamic terrorists, they came in their hijabs and their different traditions and their radicalization, and they came and they did that to us. It's because it's like, okay, no congresswoman or congressman has to depend on people from, Yemen or Pakistan or whatever to vote for them. Like that's not part of their calculation. So they can be like, yes, let's go to war in Iraq. Yes, let's go to war in Afghanistan. Like, yes, let's do all these drone strikes in Yemen, because they don't have to depend on those people to vote for them. But how do you deal with it when the people who are committing these crimes are your own constituents?
Right. And that's the crux of the problem. That's why they're having to walk this tightrope, because they don't want to lose that support. But, at the same time, like you said, and so masterfully saying about earlier, they've created a monster, and now the monster is devouring them. So they're trying to, figure out a path forward. I think in many of these cases, many of these districts, many of these states, but it's tough when your electorate is spoon-fed these conspiracy theories by prominent far-right media figures that are on 24/7. And if Fox News isn't too crazy for you, then you can always go to OAN, and you can always go to all of these other platforms. There's
exactly why I'm here, because there's just not that many TV shows that are frankly going the other way.
Yeah,
spewing actual facts instead of lies.
Exactly. And I think that's a huge problem that we really need to think about. And it's tricky. It's thorny. You don't want to get in the way of First Amendment rights, of course, but we have to figure out how to, get information to people that's correct and accurate. We have to make sure that people aren't so easily being swayed by these conspiracy theories. And I think that takes leaders who are willing to stand up to the crazy conspiracy theories and say, no, that's insane. Like, for example, Senator John McCain, the late senator, I, of course, disagreed with him on probably nearly every policy issue. But I think he did have a moral compass at the end of the day, because he was willing to stand up to one of his supporters at a rally and say, no, Obama actually isn't a Muslim. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he actually isn't, and that is, false information. And we don't have a lot of people on that side of the aisle anymore, and that's a little disheartening.
Yeah. Geck OH, I hope this is a good comment from Geck. This is the longest firsthand eyewitness interview I've seen in 48 hours of coverage. I guess that's a good thing. It's true. I mean, people usually just want to register the shock and fear on someone's face and go, what was it like? And then go, okay, let's cut to the blah, 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 the commentator, blah, blah, blah. No, but I think this is so important, talking to you and hearing your perspective, because you're on the ground in this. I mean, you're going to be, I'm assuming you're staying with the congresswoman next term, like you're going to be fighting this fight and figuring this out. And You guys have big shoes to fill. And I think that, I really liked I don't remember who it was, and maybe you can remind me, the Democratic congressman that came out today, or senator, and said, Republicans, can you please educate your people? Can you educate your constituents that this was not a fraudulent election, that the votes were legal? So there's also a culpability of the Republican senators there in not challenging their own constituents and being like, no, actually, like by continuing to object, the 103, congressional members that still objected, they're legitimizing the fraudulent claims that feed into the conspiracy theory. So I think the question now too is like, if we're ever going to get rid of this, we need people to set people straight on what the facts are. And since the right wing is not listening is calling CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, any place that actually does fact checking lies, they need to hear it from somebody that they trust, which could be their elected officials, specifically if it's a Republican. And so, how do you, maybe the role of the Republicans in the future is, instead of just sucking up to constituents, is balancing that with education and, basically saying, okay, like, we know there's a lot of noise out there. Like, we want to set you straight on like what's actually going on with climate change, like what's actually going on with guns in this country, like what's actually happening, and not from a right or left perspective, but just from these are facts that you can trust because they're coming from our office, and we care about you.
Yeah, I think ideally we would have two parties that, are occupying a fact-based world and are actually trying to stand up to the conspiracy theories and trying to educate and trying to steer this country in the right direction. Because like you bring up, climate change and all of these other issues, and every day that we spend, mired in these divisions and these, existential problems, is another day lost that we're not using to address the big policy issues that we really should be working on, like climate change and gun safety and healthcare and all these big issues. So if we're consumed by all of this madness, then we won't have time to get to those real issues that really affect people's lives.
Right, and then we do nothing. I mean, wasn't this like? I mean, maybe you can tell us, like, passing legislation during this last 4 years. What was that like, or trying to get legislation passed?
It was hard. It was hard to do, and honestly, I'm lucky because I work for a member who's a senior appropriator, which means she's on the appropriations committee. She is one of the members that puts together the federal budget essentially, and tells agencies how to spend money. And those are the only bills that have to pass. Otherwise, the government shuts down. So I'm lucky that I've been able to work on those bills and get in some critical provisions to advance our democratic agenda through those bills, using those as vehicles. Like, for example, a huge increase in clean energy programs in the energy and water appropriations bill. That there are lots of examples that we just don't hear about as much because we're so consumed by all the madness going on. But other than those appropriations bills, it's really difficult to pass anything because the current president is making it so difficult, making it so just ugly and so poisonous, the environment that we're working in. And we're still trying in the Congress to work together and work across the aisle where we can, of course. But it's been difficult with the leader of the Republican Party every day, poisoning the well and creating such a rancorous atmosphere.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful interview. My heart is with you in your resilience of getting through this attack. I can't even imagine what's been going through your head. And please take time for yourself this weekend. Relax. Don't do work. Do some meditation. I mean, deep breathing. But thank you so much for having the courage to come on the show and kind of relive this experience, because I know it wasn't an easy one, and probably something that's going to inform the rest of your professional and personal life.
Oh, for sure. And thank you. I think meditation and deep breathing sound like very great ideas. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care, Michael.
Bye-bye.
So everyone, that was an interview with Michael Harris, who is a congressional staffer for Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Florida. And he is an eyewitness to what happened in Capitol Hill. He was talking about basically being trapped in the Longworth building, seeing MAGA protesters in the tunnels underneath, which is pretty terrifying because that's supposed to be a pretty secure place. And his whole account, and you could tell how shaken up he was and how scary it was. And it must have been unbelievably terrifying, especially in an era of mass shootings, where there's a mass shooting every other week, and you know that people are armed and they're roaming around, and there's not the police presence that there should be. How scary that must have been, and you could see for staffers like him and for the congresspersons in general having to get under their desks. And we have to ask ourselves, is that something that should be happening in our country? I mean, it shouldn't happen anywhere, but should that be happening here? How could that happen here? And why would people get so unbelievably angry that they think that the solution to the problem is violence? That's a question we have to ask in our society, is that the solution is coming as an angry mob to the Capitol, armed with plastic handcuffs and assault rifles, as if they're going to take back the Capitol. And I think some interesting commentary was how people didn't even really expect to get in the Capitol, and then when they were in the Capitol, they didn't really know what to do. And then they were like, let's just steal stuff and put our feet on people's desks, and God knows what else they did inside people's offices. But we didn't even talk about with Michael, having your personal items taken and thrown on the floor, like beautiful kind of treasures on the wall, artwork, calligraphy just torn down. Like it was like, I don't even know, some garage. So we have a lot of reflection to do as a country, and something that I've been talking about in the foreign policy community. Thank you to Geck for that comment. I appreciate that. Something that we have to think about in the foreign policy community, in many of members of the foreign policy community have been deployed to do what's called de-radicalization programs in other countries. And it's usually been Islamic radicalism. How do you de-radicalize the population from joining ISIL, joining terrorist groups, from having been in terrorist groups? How do you then rehabilitate them and bring them back into a sense of normalcy? And so what we're realizing in the foreign policy community is we need to bring those skills of understanding how to de-radicalize right here at home, and understand, like, for example, what kind of messaging will work with people that have been fed a lot of misinformation for years and years. Who are the people that should tell them it? If they're probably not going to watch my show and think, oh, Samantha said that this is the case, so that's it. They need to hear it from people that they know and trust, which is hence why we're talking about congresspersons perhaps being the ones to educate their populations. We need to have influencers that have ground in these communities to be turned into educators, frankly, about what is real and what is fake. And the question is, that who is responsible for rolling out this wide-scale de-radicalization program in the US? Is it the Department of Homeland Security? Is it the Department of Education? State Department allocate funding? I don't know. But we can't just ignore this because it's clearly not going away. It's not going to magically solve itself. We have to look at why this radicalization is happening and how do we de-radicalize this population and live in harmony together. Anyway, that's the end of my thinking for the day. To everybody that has had a really rough week, I know it's been really emotional for some people, for a lot of us in the DC area especially. Also do some meditation and deep breathing, stay safe, stay away from the Capitol, although I hear that things have gotten much calmer there. And I think this is a time where we all need to kind of come up with solutions together. On next week's show, we're going to have Abigail Essman. She's the author of Rage, Narcissism, Patriarchy, and the Culture of Terrorism. Fascinating book that looks at the similarities between domestic abusers and terrorists. Really amazing author. I want to also a big thank you to my producers, Stream Inspectors, for producing this show. If you want to get your own show produced, check out Stream Inspectors. They're amazing, and for being sponsors of the show. And lastly, I run a women's leadership program, and we are taking applicants for the next cohort, which will begin in March. There are only 20 spots in the program. It's a peer-to-peer learning program where we'll discuss a lot of these issues together. How do we lead moving forward? How do we lead in a divided society in an age of pandemics, an age of protests, in a remote workforce? What does new leadership look like? So if you're interested in applying for that program, again, there's only 20 spots. They will go fast. Megan will pop that in the chat. And thank you so much for watching and for your attention. And I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.